Hello, and hasn't it been hot? 40 degrees C here, record temperatures. But despite the heat, myself and the community have been working on several updates for the PixelGameEngine. And these updates require a little bit more explanation, just a couple of sentences of text, so I thought a small and quick video would be quite useful for those wanting to use these new features, because I think they're going to be very popular. It's a bit of a mixed bag, this video, because I'm also going to be talking about the newly revised Sound PegX, and towards the end I'll be mentioning the one lone coder CodeJam 2022, which starts in a couple of weeks, so if you haven't signed up, sign up now. Right, the first thing I want to talk about is text entry in the PixelGameEngine. It is without doubt probably the most popular request with people on the Discord server. How do I enter text in my PixelGameEngine application? For example, how do I enter the name of a character? It's something we often take for granted on our computers, but because the PixelGameEngine abstracts away the keyboard to make it system agnostic, it's not as simple as it should be. However, that's been fixed with the newly implemented text entry mode. And I do promise this is going to be a quick video. We're going to rattle through code that's already written. I've got a starting application here where I define a structure for a ball, and a ball has a position, a velocity, a colour and a radius. And I'm going to have a large number of balls, as I usually do in my video, by storing them all in a vector. I have two functions. One is add ball, which adds a ball to the vector, and the other is remove ball, which extracts a ball from the vector. In fact, it takes off the last ball that was added. When we add a ball, its velocity and colour are randomised, but it always starts in the middle of the screen. I then have an additional function called update and draw balls. It updates the balls, and then it draws them. And there's nothing here we haven't seen plenty of times before. The ball's position is updated by accumulating its velocity modulated with f elapsed time. I have some rudimentary collision detection where I check if the ball has hit the edge of the screen. If it does, I clamp it to the edge of the screen for that axis, and I reverse the velocity component in that axis. And what I do for x, I then do for y. Nothing fancy here. To draw the balls, I simply draw them all as a circle using the colour that was specified before in the add ball function, and the radius. This is a PixelGameEngine application, so I've got two functions I must override. The first is onUserCreate, called once at the start of the application, and that simply adds a ball to get things going. In my onUserUpdate function, I see if the left mouse button is pressed and I add a ball. I see if the right mouse button is pressed and I remove a ball. I clear the display to a dark grey, and then I update and draw all the balls. It's a low resolution PixelGameEngine application, just 320 by 240 in this instance. So let's take a look. There it is, a ball bouncing around the screen, and if I click with the left button, I can add more, and if I click with the right button, I can remove them. Very nice. And we can see nice low resolution, things are ticking along just fine. But Jared, this is a video about text entry, I hear you already complaining. Well, true, but I wanted something in the background that was visually pleasant to look at whilst we demonstrate the text entry functions. To start text entering, we need to enable text entry mode. And this is done by calling the PixelGameEngine's text entry enable function and passing true. Now, I'm going to do this in response to the tab key being pressed. That's all there is to enabling text entry mode, and the user can happily enter text now, and when they press enter, there's a new override that the user can optionally override if they want to respond to text being entered. It's called onTextEntryComplete, and you get a string. In this instance, I'm just going to output the string to the console in the background of the PixelGameEngine. I want to display on the screen some sort of indication that I'm in text entry mode, so I'm just going to draw that fact at the top left. Let's take a look. So I press the tab key, I've entered text entry mode. I'm just going to move the window open so we can see the console in the background. Now I'm going to start typing hello, and I'm going to press enter. And we can see that hello was captured and we've exited text entry mode. Let's try something else. How are you? Fine, it works just as you expect. It captures those key presses and assembles them into a string. Fundamentally, that's what people have been asking for, but it's not very user-friendly, because we can't see what we're typing in. To assist with this, I've added some additional features to the PixelGameEngine. See, I told you having this would be a nice visual distraction to the boredom of text entry. Text entry mode maintains a string buffer in the background, and it's a string buffer with a cursor. So we can actually extract information about where that cursor is in the string buffer and draw it. Now I'll put these two lines in first, and then I'll explain what they do. I'm drawing the cursor first because I want it to be shown behind the text that's in the text entry buffer. text entry getCursor returns an integer index as to which character of the string is the cursor sat at. And I'm going to draw the cursor as a rectangle, a nice vertically thin rectangle, in red. And then I'm just going to draw the text entry buffer. This, as you might expect, gets the string in its current form. I'm drawing the text and the cursor offset to 0.16 on the screen. Let's take a look now. Let's add some balls to make the video interesting, and I'll move this over again just as I did before, but now I press Tab and we've entered text entry mode. We can see a cursor. So, hello, and we can see it starting to type. Notice that this isn't affecting the simulation running in the background at all. Let's press Enter. We can see the text entry override captured it and outputted it to standard out. Let's put in another one. How are you? Now, text entry mode also supports cursor manipulation. So we can go here, we can backspace, and we can delete, and they function just as expected. This is a test. It seems to work well. Now, there are some limitations. The built-in font on the PixelGameEngine is limited to ASCII values, or ASCII glyphs in this case. So I'm afraid international characters and characters with accents are just not an option here. This is very basic text entry. There's also a few missing symbols. In particular on a UK keyboard, I don't have the pound symbol. Now I mean actual GBP currency symbol, not this hash symbol. That's because the font doesn't have a pound symbol as part of it. Add a few more balls. Always makes you feel better. In the background, the text entry mode will filter out characters that are not acceptable. So if you do end up somehow getting strings or characters in there that shouldn't be there, they won't cause any problems when trying to render them. At least I hope not. Just having a quick dive into the PixelGameEngine header file, there's a new compiler directive called OLC Keyboard UK. This is my attempt to try and accommodate different keyboard models in the future. Now I'm going to need some volunteer help with that because I don't have access to other keyboards, and I'm sure people on the Discord will help out. But what does this do? When the PixelGameEngine is loading, it calls this OLC construct font sheet function, and this rather famously has this lovely block of code which contains the font information. This block of numbers which contains the width of the characters of the font, but now there's some additional information. There's a keyboard mapping that maps the default PixelGameEngine keys with the glyph equivalents. In this case, if the A key is pressed on the keyboard, a lowercase a will be added to a string, but if the Shift key is held down, then an uppercase A will be added. And we can see on a UK keyboard things like, for example, the 5 key. If I do Shift and 5, I get the % symbol. Now, this information may vary depending on locale, and so I'm hoping that this is a very, well, crude attempt to accommodate different locales in the future. Since the PixelGameEngine now has the ability to capture text, I've decided to go one step further and add a full-fledged command console built into the PixelGameEngine. Now, you can't easily use text entry mode and the command console at the same time. Well, you can, you just need to be a bit careful. But what I'm hoping to show now is a sort of a debugging tool and a stress testing tool and just a general useful feature I think will get a lot of people quite excited about using this in the PixelGameEngine. Okay, for now I'm going to just comment out all of the text entry mode stuff. I'm going to be sensitive to the F1 key being pressed, and if the user does press this key, I'm going to bring up the built-in command console, and I'm going to do that by calling the built-in console show function. Now, you need a way to exit the console as well, so I'm going to be sensitive to the escape key being pressed to close the console. So let's just try this mechanism first. Here is my application. I'll add some balls. And when I press the F1 key, the command console has popped up. You'll notice the simulation has been suspended. But I can now type things into the console. You can see the text here appearing at the bottom. And I press Enter. And nothing happens. And that's because, well, there's no implementation of what to do with the commands. That's entirely up to you guys. But I'm going to throw together a small demonstration which you guys can use as a starting point. When I'm done with the console, I can press the escape key, and the simulation continues as normal. If you've followed good practice and general PixelGameEngine guidelines. Anything that moves as part of your game or your simulation or your program will in some way be modulated by f-elapsed time. We saw that as we're updating the balls. When you're in console mode, you can specify a flag to the PixelGameEngine which tells it to suspend the time or not. Now, by default, that was true, and that means when we displayed the console, the simulation stopped. I'm going to set this to false. I don't want the balls to stop moving, even though the console is being displayed. Add some balls, press F1. So we now have a command console, but the simulation is still running in the background. Like with text entry, there's a new override we can specify to capture what happens when the user presses enter in the console. I've made a conscious design decision here not to parse the text that is entered. Originally my plan was to give you a vector full of strings separated by spaces. But it's not up to me how you parse these commands. These commands could be Lua commands, they could be custom commands, they could be anything at all. What you do with them is entirely up to you. But I'm going to very crudely parse one now. This approach is really susceptible to abuse and error, but it's quick enough for this simple video. I'm going to bang the incoming text into a string stream, and then assuming the user only enters valid text, I'm going to get the first word of the string stream and place that into a new string called C1. And I'm going to have a command called add. If the command is equal to add, I'm going to look at what the second argument was and assume it was an integer, no checks remember, and then I'm going to add that number of balls to the simulation and output to standard cout the phrase adding, well, however many balls. The onConsole command requires you to return a boolean. I'm going to default it to true for now, and what this means is that any command that is entered will be added to the console's command history. Let's take a look. So here we have a few balls again. I'm going to enter the command, and if I press add and then 10 and press enter, we can see 10 balls have just been thrown into the simulation. We did some standard out. There we are, we see add 10, adding 10 balls. Let's try that again. Add 50 balls this time. Perfect. Because we returned true from that function, it added those commands to a command history buffer, so I can press the up keys and down keys to go back through the commands I've already had. So I can add another 50, another 50, another 50, just as you would expect any command prompt to give you that behaviour. And I can press escape to exit the console back to normal simulation. I've added some more commands, the ability to delete balls from the simulation, reset, which will clear them all, and count, which will display the total number, well, being simulated. Outputting to standard out is quite convenient, but it would be more useful if our console could also capture standard out. This means we don't need to keep looking at the console window behind the PixelGameEngine, if it exists, because it might not. We can specify at any point in our program to capture the standard out and divert it to the inbuilt PixelGameEngine console, and we do that with the console capture standard out function and pass true to tell it to do that. If we pass false, it will put the output back in the appropriate place. So let's try this now with our new features. I'm going to bring up the console and I'm going to add 100 balls. There we go. And I'm going to remove 50 of them. And we can see up here in the top left that this is actually what was being displayed before via standard cout. The PixelGameEngine console is capturing this now and displaying it. Add another 100, another 100, another 100, another 100. Let's add 10,000. Boom. Look at that. That's very nice. So currently there's 10,451 balls in the simulation. Let's clear them all with the reset command. And we can find our add 10,000 again. 10,000, 10,000, another 10,000, another 10,000, and another 10,000. This is very pretty. You can see the frame rate is starting to get about 75 frames per second. I should point out that my PC is about 10 years old now, so I'm pretty pleased with that. But it is quite low resolution after all. In fact, we can see how many we've got if we count them. 50,000. That's quite nice, isn't it? One last thing to add about command console mode in PixelGameEngine is it is window size independent. So here I've made the PixelGameEngine window much smaller, but the console remains the same size. Oh. It will also text wrap any output around the edges, not necessarily the input. So if I put in loads of characters here, a nice big long string, maybe I should make it text wrap the input, but I haven't. But the output certainly is, so you don't miss any. I hope that will prove quite a useful addition to those that are developing slightly more mature PixelGameEngine projects where sometimes you need to tinker with things behind the scenes whilst your application is running. Next up, I want to talk about the SoundPegX. So this is an extension that allows you to play simply some sounds in PixelGameEngine applications, and it's had a bit of a rough ride. It started off as something called the OLC Noisemaker as part of my Code It Yourself synthesizer series way back when. Then it matured into something that was built into the console game engine. The PixelGameEngine dropped it and made it into an extension, at which point it became neglected and bug-riddled. The community stepped in to try and fix things up, and we ended up with Linux implementations and Mac implementations, but we never really had any sort of scriptum implementations built in, and there were some other fussy things about how many channels you could have and which devices you could open. It wasn't great. During a live stream about a month ago, I took it upon myself to rewrite the SoundPegX, and it's now called the Soundwave Engine because it's entirely standalone from PixelGameEngine. It can work now with your other applications too. It is in its infancy, but it already supports Linux platforms and it supports Scripton as well, although you may need a little bit of help from the Discord community if you can't get that working properly. In many ways, SoundWaveEngine is very similar to how the SoundPegX was constructed, and in many ways it's also an improvement. Let's have a quick look. As you might have come to expect from One Lone Coder, using the SoundWaveEngine is a single include header file. It doesn't need PixelGameEngine at all in order to operate, so yes, you can use this however you want to use it. In the previous extension, there wasn't necessarily an instance of a device and what a sample is. It was all rather ad hoc. That's been formalized a bit more now. You need to create an instance of Wave Engine, and any samples, you'll need to have a handle to those too. The Wave Engine is responsible for managing the audio devices and playing the sounds. A sample is a waveform. In onUserCreate, I'm going to call the initialize audio function on my engine, and this allows you to set things like the sample rate and the number of channels, etc. I'm going to load a waveform, and it's got to be a WAV file, unfortunately. I don't have any MP3 decoding built into the header, but I'm going to load a waveform into sample1. In onUserUpdate, I'm going to be sensitive to the spacebar being pressed, and then I'm going to call engine.playWaveform and pass in the sample. Now, at the moment, we're still developing the SoundPegX a little bit. How these things are moved around may change slightly, and that's the nature of all of the One Lone Coder extensions. But let's take a look. So I can press space, and every time I do, I hear a sound. Rather awkwardly, if I go into console mode, and still type spaces, I still get the sound playing, which shows you that the simulation is still very much live in the background. That might become a little bit tedious. Therefore, if we know we're going to be taking the console quite seriously, it might be worth guarding our text input by if the console is being displayed or not. We can check the isConsole function, and if it isn't, then we'll allow regular keyboard entry. So now we can get some sounds, and if I show the console, I can type spaces, but we don't get the sound anymore. Perfect. Behind the scenes, the core implementation of the sound engine is very different to how it was previously. And one of the design aims of this sound engine is to be time agnostic when it comes to sample rates and sampling of waveforms. This means we can now pass in multipliers that change the speed the sound is played back. So if I play it at double the speed, we should get a higher pitched sound. I wanted to be brief, and that's all I have to say about SoundWaveEngine for now, but if you dig into the header file, you'll start to see there's quite a lot of stuff in there, particularly for the mechanics of doing sound synthesis on demand, and that's something I want to talk about later on this year. Don't forget, this channel was founded off the back of building your own synthesizer, so it's something that's very close to my heart, and I think we do enough graphic stuff. I wanted to do some audio stuff too. Right, all that's left to talk about in this video is the upcoming One Lone Coder CodeJam 2022. It starts in a couple of weeks, and you can register your interest by logging into the itch website just below. I'll provide links for that in the comments and below this video. Each year we have the jam. It allows people of any background, any ability to well, code together and program something that relates to a theme, and we've had some good themes in the past. They're usually pretty broad, pretty vague, so it allows as many people to take part as possible. I should emphasize it's not a game jam, it is just a code jam, so it doesn't have to be game related. It can be a project, it can be an application. Some people have even submitted things like board games in the past. I don't know how valid that is, it's not that easy to judge, but hey, I'm not going to say no. Each year the code jams have been quite successful. We often have about 500 or 600 applicants, and we've been getting over 100 entries for the last few jams. It's a great way to gain a little bit of exposure for your projects. And so if you're interested, and I really recommend you have a go and take part, head on over to itch.io/jam/OLC CodeJam 2022. You probably, most likely, you're already a member. But register for the jam and you'll get some updates about when things start. The theme has not been announced, it will only be announced at the very start of the jam. One important thing to mention is you are not limited to using PixelGameEngine. You can use any technologies and any languages, we have no restrictions in this case. Though if you'll permit a shameless plug, it does compile for the browser, and browser-based entries traditionally do better. And we can see here on my itch dashboard that the previous jams have been very well attended indeed, so let's try and get the same going this year round. I appreciate that I'm not doing videos as often, and therefore there's not going to be as much interest as usual I'd expect, but it would be nice to get these numbers up. So that's it from me. Please do register for the jam. I think it's great for the community and it's wonderful to see people's projects grow and take part, and you'll be surprised just how many people out there are willing to help you get something done. Normal service will be resumed in the future. My next video is going to be about, save file formats. It's an interesting one because it's a file format I've been using myself for about 15 years and I found it to be very, very useful. And it's also very flexible too, so it's been quite an exciting one. Until then, take care and I'll see you soon.